Hey guys, it's Vandy Hazel back at another Card Fight Vanguard deck profile. So hope you guys enjoy. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and donate to the Patreon. Let's get this one started. Today's deck is Shadow Paladin, Witches. This is one of the first deck profiles people did on V-Series V-Series Premium Collection because it was one of the first decks that came out to more or less an extent, and it was more or less the worst one out of all of them, in my personal opinion. And I really hate Witches, so we're already at the disadvantage here. But it's a good deck if you can spam out enough field and if you can get your opponent to constantly throw down triggers and call them back. So it's not the worst thing in the world. So let's go ahead and go down. First up, our starter today is Full Bow. Why it's Full Bow? Because I do not know a Witch starter. If there was a Witch starter, I missed it on accident. But basically a skill, 6k base, 10k shield. This is a standard auto and road plan, you get to draw a card. Then if your opponent's Vanguard's a greater one or greater, you get a quick shield ticket. Nothing special. It's just the draw that you always top deck off for some reason, followed by a 5k shield that you normally use for discarding fodder. So it's an okay card. Now for triggers. We have 4 draws, 4 crit, another 4 crit, and 4 heal. Why no draw PG? Like I said before, this deck is mainly Witches. The whole main deck is Witches, and it would feel weird if there was only one card in the deck in terms of non-trigger wise that wasn't a Witch. So, and that one card was either a PG or a very, very, very shitty grade 1. So might as well just give it to the Witches. And plus the Witch PG does do an extra thing over the draw PG, so might as well have like the regular draw trigger followed by 8 crit and 4 heal. So, yeah. And now onto the ZPG. We got 4 copies of Witch of Extirpation Behera, 7k base. It is a PG. It has the standard, you can only have 4 copies of it in deck like most cards, and then when you discard when placed on guard circle, you can discard a card, and one of your units can't be hit till end of battle. But if you have to ride it, you're just grade locked, and you have no other choice, and you have to ride it, if it's placed on Van, you get a free draw, and you have to discard. It doesn't have the May clause, it doesn't have the cost, you have to draw, but at least you get a free draw out of it, and if you're going second, you draw for Full Bow, and you get the quick shield, you draw for this thing, and then you just discard the quick shield. So 4 copies, if you have to ride it, you have to ride it, but at least you're not minusing. So 4. And now we got 4 copies of Skull Witch Nemain, the card that has gotten extremely cheaper, but that's also because V-Series is ending. 5k shield, 5k power, 10k base, 10k shield, 5k power, act rear guard, rest this unit, search your deck for up to 1 5k power card, call it to an open rearguard circle, and shuffle your deck. It is a named once per turn. Okay, pretty much call down this from the deck if you want. Call down a trigger, and the reason why you mainly call down triggers with this is for the sole purpose of, like, you have a back row. There is a unit that constantly forces you to rest your units to countercharge and soul charge, so mainly to fill up your back row for that. And because you're using the main, yeah, your back row is going to be, like, more weakish on the other side where you won't be hitting for bigger numbers. But in exchange, if your opponent does kill your rear guards in any way, shape, or form, you still have your hand to go off of. And if they kill your Nemain, since you're only mostly going to call one of them and you're probably just going to call triggers for the rest, you can just call down another one and keep going. So as they're nuking your board, they're losing resources, trying to stop you from slowly advancing to kill them, while Nemain just constantly gives you more resources to work with from your hand. It's kind of like how I like to play the new Dragon Empire and Overdress, while constantly call down the starter from the drop zone. Yes, you do not need to do that, and frankly, to most people, you're minusing by doing that because it's a vanilla. And I agree with you, it is a vanilla and it's kind of a bad decision. But the 6k over time slowly adds up and eventually overpowers your opponent, and while you have that extra rear guard while your opponent's trying to murder it, you kind of just, win with all your other rear guards, or they focus on the other rear guards and they forget about that, and that's what ends up killing them in the end. So, 4 copies of Nemain, it can be really helpful if you know what you're doing. 4 copies of Cold-Blooded Witch Luba. 8k base, 10k shield, 1 skill, auto rear. This ability's cost is reduced by 1 counterblast for each of your opponent's grade 0 rear guards. When placed, counterblast 2 and put a grade 2 or greater normal unit from your drop zone at the bottom to draw a card. So you recycle your grade 2s or graders, which is important because you might want to ride your grade 3 more, and when you're using the main, you're constantly shuffling your deck, so it's not like it's going to stay at the bottom forever. Or you can reshuffle your grade 2, which you actually need in deck, so it's helpful to have that. It sucks that it's an album place, and it sucks that it's Counterblast 2 And it sucks that you have to have your opponent being at grade 0 rear guards, where they could easily just call over them. But at the same time, you could have just been turboing them out, and they might not be able to just call over them, or it wouldn't be worth it. So you could get lucky on that regard, where they just have grade 0 rear guards, and you get a draw out of it in the end. So I say 4 copies is appropriate. Next up, we got grade 2s, 1 copy of Sharp Fang Witch Foldia. This was a tech, because there was 1 spot left in the deck. I had no idea what to give it to, and it was either this or a crappy grade 1, so I decided to give it to this. 8k base, 5k shield, auto Vanna rear. When placed, counterblast 1, search your deck for up to 2 trigger units, call them in a rear and shuffle your deck. That is why that is kind of bad. You gotta call 2 triggers, but in exchange, by paying 1 counterblast, you're getting 2 free units. To some extent, you're deck thinning. Because of all the drive checks you do in your deck, and there's only 1 card in this deck that recycles, and that's this thing, if you constantly, and you're also searching with the main as well, so having this to like deck thin out your draw triggers, so you don't like get to the point where, oh, you have 4 cards left in deck, you drive check a draw trigger, bring you down to 2, you drive check another, just anything, it's down to 1 card, you can't drive check again, because once you hit 0 deck cards, you lose. So having this to just get rid of the draw triggers, or just triggers in general, so that you can show up your board and have boosters so that you can actually hit your opponent guaranteedly, is helpful. It is still not a good card because it's an 8k base that's an on-place counterblast 1, and you still got to lose 2 triggers, but it's still just something of use, so 1 copy. 4 copies of Witch of Calamity Ember. 10k base, 5k shield, auto rear once per turn. When your other rear guard is placed, you may have this unit get plus 5k power. Use superior call from the deck. This is a guaranteed plus 5. Even when you're just calling other stuff from hand, it's still plus 5. It can hit okay numbers. It's not meant to be the big hitter. It's meant to be, since you have 2 different Vanguard attacks to some extent, it's meant to be the rear guards hit. The rear guard Vanguard attacks, they mostly guard that. Then you attack with the Vanguard, they guard that. You attack with a mirror either to the rear guard or to the Vanguard. So since a mirror has more power, it can hit pretty much anything. And if you have to hit the Vanguard, you're constantly forcing them to throw down more. So it's a better option. So 4 copies. 4 copies of Productive Witch Nez. 7k base, 5k shield, act rear guard once per turn, rest 3 rear guards, and you and your opponent may countercharge 1 and soul charge 1. Each player chooses independently. So you have to pay the cost. Your opponent doesn't have to, if I'm correct. You do not have to countercharge and soul charge, but why wouldn't you countercharge and soul charge? Because you're resting 3 of your rear guards, which sucks because you're constantly losing that back row, but that's mainly what the main is for. You get a countercharge out of it, and your deck counterblasts a decent amount. Your deck also soul blasts a decent amount to even get your opponent to call grade 0s in the first place. So having that soul charge is okay. So 4 copies. Mainly use this as like intercept fodder, or like if you need to get the resources out. So 4. And speaking of grade 2s, 4 copies of Witch of Reality Femme. 10k base, 5k shield, act Vanguard once per turn, soul blast 1. Your opponent chooses 2 grade 0 unit cards from his or her drop, calls them to his or her rear guard with grade 1 or greater units on them. If no cards are called, it gets plus 1 drive till end of turn. So I have one problem with this, and this is a big problem with it. This is the only card in Standard for Witches that calls grade 0 units. The Vanguard skill is focused on grade 0 units. This thing's skill is focused on grade 0 units. The main grade 1, Luna, is focused on grade 0 units. So why is only out of all 3 of those, why does only one of them have access to calling down grade 0 units? And it's an on-Vanguard skill, which granted when we get to the main grade 3 isn't that bad comparatively. But why is it an on-Vanguard restrictive once per turn? Why? This deck is... They literally made it so that this deck has the hardest time trying to either get power out or trying to just, like... How do I put this? Or just trying to get good in general. The only thing I can say about this is the best, quote-unquote, budget deck out there to an extent, because this is very hard to pull off to like get the best out of it. The only way I can see you winning with Witches is if your opponent bricks or you genuinely know what you're doing. So 4 copies. 4 copies of Witch of Sculpted Group Annalyn. 13k base, 4 skip, grade 3, twin drive, auto Vanna rear. 1 attacks if you have 4 more grade 1 rear guards. This unit gets plus 20k power down to battle. And that is also what the main is for. If you want to go for the I guess normally you would go for the aggressive domain strategy where you just rest one, call down another copy, wait till next turn, call down a third copy, so you have 3 grade 1 rear guards. So in the off chance that you gotta just rely on this thing being your main hitter, call it down. If you're out of Counterblast, so you can't even use your main Vanguard skill, or if you're out of Soul Blast, so the only reason to call Femme is just to get 1 extra drive, and you have a grade 0 and you have a grade 1 in hand instead, just call down the grade 1, call down this thing immediately becomes a 33k hitter. And it can also be helpful on Vanguard, so 4 copies. And now on to our main grade 3 that I keep referencing. Mesmerizing Witch Fianna. 13k base, grade 3, twin drive, force gift, act Vanguard circle once per turn, counterblast 1, retire 2 rear guards, the main, so you can easily just call back those units. Search your deck or hand for up to 1 Reach of Reality Femme, call it to your front row rear, and if you search your deck, shuffle the deck, and the circle the unit is called to becomes a Vanguard circle till end of turn. So you can use Femme's skill on rear guard if you called it with this effect, but once more I must say, why doesn't it do anything that involves grade 0s? But technically it does, because the second skill is Continuous Van. During your turn, all of your Vanguards get plus 5k power for each of your opponent's grade 0 rear guards. So at the very least it's going to hit 16 or 21. My question still stands. Why? Why is there no other cards that can call down grade 0s? I know they only had 3 cards that they could have put into V-Series Premium Collection, so they couldn't just make it outright, make a whole entire deck and have that whole entire deck be super consistent within 3 cards, especially when there's no setup for it or anything. But why couldn't there, either this early grade 1, why couldn't either of them had another extra skill that just said, once per turn, pay some cost like a discard or a counterblast or even a soul blast at this point, and call down a grade 0 from drop? That would be so easy. There's barely any cost to it, and it wouldn't make the deck inconsistent at all. It would actually make the deck better, so you can get more power out of it with the Vanguard, and it may just increase the chances of your opponent being stuck on grade 0s, but you're basically being forced to, at the very most, 10k power, where a lot of people either just kill the rear guards or use them as soul fodder or sack fodder for literally anything. So why? That's basically my point on this. I'm disappointed in Witches because they have the least amount of consistency. Spectral Duke had something. What's it called? Jewel Knights have something. Dauntless has a lot, and I should know because I've literally tested Dauntless 100 times. Not because I like Dauntless, despite the fact I do, it's just because it was the only deck I was able to use for a certain reason. Ethics Buster had a purpose, but they also had setup, so that one doesn't count. What else is one that just didn't have... Well, yeah, Jewel Knights didn't have setup. Yeah, Jewel Knights actually work really well. And that's the only thing... Oh, yeah, Spectral Duke 2, I guess, where it doesn't really have much setup besides the entire clan of Gold Paladin. But yeah, this deck just feels underwhelming because it doesn't have any form of setup beforehand, or their skills just kind of feel mediocre at best. So 4 copies, and yeah. And then on to gift-wise, we got 4 gift ones... 4 force ones. It's basically the Vanna rear on place. It gets plus 10k power, and it can be stacked during your turn. So normally you give it to the van or you give it to the rear just so you can hit more numbers. And then you got Force 2 where it gives an extra critical instead of plus 10k power, but it can't stack. It turns the original critical to 2. I honestly use this more than I use Force 1 because you don't need Force 1 despite the fact of how little power you're actually gaining when you think about it. But Force 2 can at least help you, I guess, rush down the opponent so that you benefit off it. If you want a fun little play here, go Force 2 on the rear guard that isn't on the Tentacle Vanguard like Femme and Fianna. Go to the one that isn't on the rear guard, most likely a Mare, because you can attack with Van. Most people guard the Vanguard because they're afraid of crit sacking. You could attack with Femme because they're most likely going to guard that because it's also a Vanguard, but they might not because it's only 1 drive or possibly 2, depends on how many drives it has. You do your trigger check. You attack with Emir, because it has a double crit on it. Depending on what damage they're at, you could either damage starve them with it, or you can force them to go to 5. Or you can just keep hitting their rear guard so they eventually give you a damage for free. So, yeah, just Force 2 feels better because you can pressure your opponent more. And then we got the Quick Shield, which is the when one of your units is attacked, it gets plus 5k power to end the battle. I know why it's not an actual 5k shield, but I will still question it every time why would they bother calling it a quick shield if it doesn't actually give any shielding value? That's just all I have to say about that. And that was the deck. Yes, my deck is far different from everyone else's, and yes, it just seemed like I'm not into it. That's because I'm not really a witch player. I never liked them to begin with. I thought like this was the chance to bring it back, but they honestly gave witches the worst out of everything. They didn't give them anything to work with. They just gave it one card that can call stuff from drop, and that was it. So if you don't see that unit, you're screwed. If your opponent binds it, like when they're playing anything from Link Joker or Narukami, you're kind of screwed because you can't get it back. And pretty much my point is this. The deck dies if it cannot get Fame out because that's the only card that can call from drop. When they go into Overdress and they keep giving us support for V-Series stuff, hopefully those stuff, if they decide to give it to witches, because I like the aesthetic of witches. I like their designs. I like their skills being focused on the opponent's units because that constantly makes it so that they have to call more units and then pay more cost to get rid of them. But I hate the fact that they're really small and they could have done something to fix them and they didn't. Even Worm Toxin Mutant got a better experience from V-Series collection, and it was straight up in the same case as this where there was no setup for it, but it was better than this. That's all I have to say about it. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Sorry to any witch main who finds this video very lacking. I'm sorry, it's just my take on it. And don't forget to stand up, be your Vanguard, and I'll see you all in the next one.